Hello, Squirrel Squad. I have a little caramel in my mouth. It's, of course, stuck to the roof of my denture. I'm trying to get it gone. The last thing I read was trying to get down. Was it regret for the conquest she relinquished? Was it sympathy for her friend? Or was it an uncontrollable overflow of feeling? Hang on. As she read some sad or tender passage of the little romance which she kept hidden away in her own heart. On Monday, Polly began the delicate and dangerous task. Still there. I don't want to stick my finger down there. On Monday, Polly began, I said that. Instead of going to her pupils by way of the park and the pleasant streets adjoining, she took a roundabout route through back streets and thus escaped Mr. Sidney, who, as usual, came home to dinner very early that day and looked disappointed because he nowhere saw the bright face in the modest bonnet. Polly kept this up for a week, and by carefully avoiding the Shaw's house during calling hours, she saw nothing of Mr. Sidney, who, of course, didn't visit her at Miss Mill's. Minnie happened to be poorly that week and took no lesson, so Uncle Sid was deprived of his last hope and looked as if his allowance of sunshine had been suddenly cut off. Now, as Polly was by no means a perfect creature, I'm free to confess that the old temptation assailed her more than once that week. For when the first excitement of the dodging reform had subsided, she missed the pleasant little interviews that used to put a certain flavor of romance into her dull, hard-working days. She liked Mr. Sidney very much, for he always had been kind and friendly since the early times when he had treated the little girl with a courtesy which the young women gratefully remembered. I don't think it was his wealth, accomplishments, or position that most attracted Polly, though these doubtless possessed a greater influence than she suspected. It was that indescribable something which women are quick to see and feel in men who have been blessed with wise and good mothers. This had an especial charm to Polly, for she soon found this side of his character was not shown to everyone. With most girls he was very like the other young men of his set, except perhaps in a certain grace of manner which was as natural to him as his respect for all womankind. But with Fanny and Polly he showed the domestic traits and virtues which are more engaging to womanly women than any amount of cool intellect or worldly wisdom. Polly had seen a good deal of him during her visits at the Shaws, where he was intimate owing to the friendship between Madam and his mother, but she had never thought of him as a possible lover for either Fanny or herself, because he was 6 or 8 years older than they, and still sometimes assumed the part of a venerable mentor, as in the early days. Lately this had changed, especially towards Polly, and it flattered her more than she would confess even to herself. She knew he admired her one talent, respected her independence, and enjoyed her society, but when something warmer and more flattering than admiration, respect, or pleasure crept into his manner, she could not help seeing that one of the good gifts of his life was daily coming more and more within her reach, and began to ask herself if she could honestly receive the gift and reward the giver. At first she tried to think she could, but unfortunately hearts are so contrary that they won't be obedient to reason, will, or even gratitude. Polly felt a very cordial friendship for Mr. Sidney, but not one particle of the love, which is the only coin in which love can be truly paid. And then she took a fancy into her head that she ought to accept this piece of good fortune for the sake of the family, and forget herself. But this false idea of self-sacrifice did not satisfy, for she was not a fashionable girl trained to believe that her first duty was to make a good match and never mind the consequences, though they rendered her miserable for life. Polly's creed was very simple. If I don't love him, I ought not to marry him, especially when I do love somebody else, though everything is against me. Tom, of course. If she had read as many French novels as some young ladies, she might have considered it interesting to marry under the circumstances and suffer a secret anguish to make her a romantic victim. But Polly's education had been neglected, and after a good deal of natural indecision, she did what most women do in such cases. Thought she would wait and see. The discovery of Fanny's secret seemed to show her something to do, for if the wait-and-see decision was making her friend unhappy, it must be changed as soon as possible. This finished Polly's indecision, and after that night she never allowed herself to dwell upon the pleasant temptation which came in a guise particularly attractive to a young girl with the spice of the old Eve in her composition. So day after day she trudged through the dull back streets, longing for the sunny park, the face that always brightened when it saw her coming, and most of all the chance of meeting, well, it wasn't Trix. When Saturday came, Polly started as usual for a visit to Becky and Bess, but couldn't resist stopping at the Shaws to leave a little parcel for Fan, though it was calling time. As she stepped in, meaning to run up for a word, if Fanny should chance to be alone, 2 hats on the hall table arrested her. "Who's here, Katy?" "Only Mr. Sidney and Master Tom. Won't you stop a bit, Miss Polly?" "Not this morning. I'm rather in a hurry," and away went Polly as if a dozen eager pupils were clamoring for her presence. But as the door shut behind her, she felt so left out in the cold that her eyes filled, and when Nep, Tom's great Newfoundland, came blundering after her, she stopped and hugged his shaggy head, saying softly, as she looked into the brown benevolent eyes full of almost human sympathy, "Now go back, old dear. You mustn't follow me. Oh, Nep, it's so hard to put love away when you want it very much. And it isn't right to take it. A foolish little speech to make to a dog, but you see Polly was only a tender-hearted girl trying to do her duty. Since he is safe with Fanny, I may venture to walk where I like. It's such a lovely day, all the babies will be out, and it always does me good to see them," thought Polly, turning into the wide sunny street where West Endham promenaded at that hour. The babies were out in full force, looking as gay and delicate and sweet as the snowdrops, hyacinths, and daffodils on the banks whence the snow had melted. But somehow the babies didn't do Polly the good she expected, though they smiled at her from their carriages and kissed their chubby hands as she passed them, for Polly had the sort of face that babies love. One tiny creature in blue plush was casting despairing glances after a very small lord of creation who was walking away with a toddling Belle in white, while a second young gentleman in gorgeous purple gaiters was endeavoring to console the deserted damsel Take hold of Master Charlie's hand, Miss Mamie, and walk pretty like Willie and Flossie, said the maid. No, no, I want to do with Willie. He won't let me. Do way, Tarly, I don't like you, cried Bluebonnet, casting down her ermine muff and sobbing in a microscopic handkerchief, the thread lace edging on which couldn't mitigate her woe as it might have done that of an older sufferer. Willie likes Flossie best, so stop crying and come right along, you naughty child. As poor little Dido was jerked away from the unsympathetic maid and purple gaiters essayed in vain to plead his cause, Polly said to herself with a smile and a sigh, how early the old story begins. It seemed as if the spring weather had brought out all manner of tender things besides fresh grass and the first dandelions, for as she went down the street, Polly kept seeing different phases of the sweet old story which she was trying to forget. At a street corner, a black-eyed schoolboy was parting from a rosy-faced schoolgirl whose music roll he was reluctantly surrendering. Don't you forget now, said the boy, looking bashfully into the bright eyes that danced with pleasure as the girl blushed and smiled and answered reproachfully, why, of course I shan't. That little romance runs smoothly so far, I hope it may to the end, said Polly heartily as she watched the lad tramp away whistling, as blithely as if his pleasurable emotions must find a vent or endanger the buttons on his round jacket. Round jacket? While the girl pranced on her own doorstep as if practicing for the joyful dance which she had promised not to forget. A little farther on, Polly passed a newly engaged couple whom she knew, walking arm in arm for the first time, both wearing that proud yet conscious look which is so delightful to behold upon the countenances of these temporarily glorified beings. How happy they seem, oh dear, said Polly, and trudged on wondering if her turn would ever come and fearing that it was impossible. A glimpse of a motherly-looking lady entering a door received by a flock of pretty children who cast themselves upon Mamma and her parcels with cries of rapture did Polly good, and when a minute after she passed a gray old couple walking placidly together in the sunshine, she felt better still, and was glad to see such a happy ending to the romance she had read all down the street. As if the mischievous little god wished to take Polly at a disadvantage, or perhaps to give her another chance. Just at that instant, Mr. Sidney appeared at her side. How he got there was never very clear to Polly, but there he was, flushed and a little out of breath, but looking so glad to see her that she hadn't the heart to be stiff and cool as she had fully intended to be when they met. Very warm, isn't it? He said when he had shaken hands and fallen into step just in the old way. You seem to find it so, and Polly laughed with a sudden sparkle in her eyes. She really couldn't help it. It was so pleasant to meet him again, just when she was feeling so lonely. Have you given up teaching the Roths? Asked Sidney, changing the subject. No. Do you go as usual? Yes. Well, it's a mystery to me how you get there. As much as it is to me how you got here so suddenly. I saw you from the Shaw's window and took the liberty of running after you by the back street, he said, laughing. That's the way I get to the Roths, answered Polly. She did not mean to tell, but his frankness was so agreeable she forgot herself. It's not nearly so pleasant or so short for you as the park. I know it, but people sometimes get tired of old ways and like to try the new ones. Polly didn't say that quite naturally, and Sidney gave her a quick look as if he asked, "Do you get tired of old friends too, Miss Polly?" "Not often, but—" And there she stuck, for the fear of being ungrateful or unkind made her almost hope that he wouldn't take the hint which she had been carefully preparing for him. There was such a dreadful little pause, which Polly broke by saying abruptly, "How is Fan?" "Dashing as ever. Do you know, I'm rather disappointed in Fanny, for she don't seem to improve with her years," said Sidney, as if he accepted the diversion and was glad of it. "Ah, you never see her at her best. She puts on that dashing air before people to hide her real self, but I know her better. And I assure you she does improve. She tries to mend her faults, though she won't own it, and will surprise you some day by the amount of heart and sense and goodness she's got." Polly spoke heartily now, and Sidney looked at her as if Fanny's defender pleased him more than Fanny's defense. "I'm very glad to hear it, and willingly take your word for it. Everybody shows you their good side, I think, and that's why you find the world such a pleasant place." "Oh, but I don't. It often seems like a very hard and dismal place, and I croak over my trials like an ungrateful raven." "Can't we make the trials lighter for you?" The voice that put the question was so very kind that Polly dared not look up, because she knew what the eyes were silently saying. "Thank you, no, I don't get more tribulation than is good for me, I fancy, and we're apt to make mistakes when we try to dodge troubles." "Or people," added Sidney in a tone that made Polly color up to her forehead. "How lovely the park looks," she said in great confusion. "Yes, it's the pleasantest walk we have, don't you think so?" asked the artful young man, laying a trap into which Polly immediately fell. "Yes, indeed, it's always so refreshing to me to see a little bit of the country, as it were, especially at the season." "Oh, Polly, what a stupid speech to make, when you had just given him to understand you were tired of the park." Not being a fool or a coxcomb, Sidney put this and that together, and taking various trifles into the account, he had by this time come to the conclusion that Polly had heard the same bits of gossip that he had, which linked their names together, that she didn't like, and tried to show she didn't in this way. He was quicker to take a hint than she had expected, and being both proud and generous, resolved to settle the matter at once, for Polly's sake as well as his own. So when she made her last brilliant remark, he said quietly, watching her face keenly all the while, "I thought so. Well, I'm going out of town on business for several weeks, so you can enjoy your little bit of country without being annoyed by me." "Annoyed? Oh, no," cried Polly earnestly, then stopped short, not knowing what to say for herself. She thought she had a good deal of the coquette in her, and I've no doubt that with time and training she would have become a very dangerous little person. But now she was far too transparent and straightforward by nature even to tell a white lie cleverly. Sidney knew this and liked her for it, but he took advantage of it nevertheless by asking suddenly, "Honestly now, wouldn't you go the old way and enjoy it as much as ever if I wasn't anywhere about to set the busybodies gossiping?" "Yes," said Polly before she could stop herself, and then could have bitten her tongue out for being so rude. Another awful pause seemed impending, but just at that moment a horseman clattered by with a smile and salute, which caused Polly to exclaim, "Oh, there's Tom," with a tone and look that silenced the words hovering on Sid's lips and caused him to hold out his hand with a look which made Polly's heart flutter then and ache with pity for a good while afterward, though he only said, "Goodbye, Polly." He was gone before she could do anything but look up at him with a remorseful face, and she walked on, feeling that the first and perhaps the only lover she would ever have had read his answer and accepted it in silence. She did not know what else he had tried, and comforted herself with the thought that he did not care for her very much, since he took the first rebuff so quickly. Polly did not return her favorite walk till she learned from Minnie that Uncle had really left town, and then she found that his friendly company and conversation was what had made the way so pleasant. After all, she sighed over the perversity of things in general, and croaked a little over her trials in particular, but on the whole got over her loss better than she expected, for soon she had other sorrows beside her own to comfort, and such first thing she had surged over her trials, and on the whole got over her loss better than she expected, for soon she had other sorrows besides her own comfort, and such work does a body more good than floods of regretful tears or hours of sentimental lamentation. She shunned Fanny for a day or two, but gained nothing by it, for that young lady, hearing of Sidney's sudden departure, could not rest till she discovered the cause of it, and walked in upon Polly one afternoon, just when the dusk made it a propitious hour for tender confidences. "What have you been doing with yourself lately?" asked Fanny, composing herself with her back toward the rapidly waning light. "Wagging to and fro as usual. What's the news with you?" answered Polly, feeling that something was coming, and rather glad to have it over and done with. "Nothing particular. Trix treats Tom shamefully, and he bears it like a lamb. I tell him to break his engagement, not be worried so, but he won't, because she has been jilted once, and he thinks it's such a mean thing to do. Perhaps she'll jilt him. I've no doubt she will, if anything better comes along. But Trix is getting passé, and I shouldn't wonder if she kept him to his word, just out of perversity, if nothing else." "Poor Tom, what a fate," said Polly, with what was meant to be a comical groan, but it sounded so tragical that she thought it wouldn't pass, and hastened to hide the failure by saying with a laugh, "If you call Trix passé at 23, what shall we all be at 25? Utterly done with and laid upon the shelf?" "I feel so already, for I don't get half the attention I used to have. And the other night I heard Maud and Grace wondering why those old gals didn't stay at home and give them a chance. How is Maudie?" "Pretty well, but she worries me by her queer tastes and notions. She loves to go into the kitchen and mess. She hates to study, and said right before the Vincents that she should think it would be great fun to be a beggar girl, to go round with a basket. It must be so interesting to see what you'd get. Minnie said the other day she wished she was a pigeon, so she could paddle in the puddles and not fuss about rubbers," as in boots. "Wellies. By the way, when is her uncle coming back?" asked Fanny, who couldn't wait any longer, and joyfully seized the opening Polly made for her. "I'm sure I don't know." "Nor care, I suppose, you hard-hearted thing. Why, Fan, what do you mean? I'm not blind, my dear, neither is Tom, and when a young gentleman cuts a call abruptly short and races after a young lady and is seen holding her hand at the quietest corner of the park and then goes traveling all of a sudden, we know what it means if you don't. Who got up that nice idea, I'd like to know, demanded Polly, as Fanny stopped for breath. Now don't be affected, Polly, but just tell me like a dear, hasn't he proposed? No, he hasn't. Don't you think he means to? I don't think he'll ever say a word to me. Well, I'm surprised, and Fanny drew a long breath as if a load was off her mind. Then she added in a changed tone, but don't you love him, Polly? No. Truly? Truly, Fan. Neither spoke for a minute, but the heart of one of them beat joyfully, and the dusk hid a very happy face. Don't you think he cared for you, dear? Asked Fanny presently. I don't mean to be prying, but I really thought he did. Well, that's not for me to say, but if it's so, it's only a passing fancy, and he'll soon get over it. Do tell me all about it. I'm so interested, and I know something has happened. I hear it in your voice, for I can't see your face. Do you remember the talk we once had after reading one of Miss Edgeworth's stories about not letting one's lovers come to a declaration if one didn't love them? Yes. And you girls said it wasn't proper, and I said it was honest anyway. Well, I always meant to try it if I got a chance, and I have. Mind you, I don't say Sidney loved me, for he never said so, and never will now, but I did fancy he rather liked me, and might do more if I didn't show him that it was of no use. And you did? Cried Fanny, much excited. I just gave him a hint, and he took it. He meant to go away before that, so don't think his heart is broken, or mind what silly tattlers say. I didn't like his meeting me so much, and told him so by going another way. He understood, and being a gentleman, made no fuss. I dare say he thought I was a vain goose, and laughed at me for my pains, like Churchill in Helen. No, he wouldn't. He'd like it and respect you for doing it. But, Polly, it would have been a grand thing for you. I can't sell myself for an establishment. Mercy, what an idea. Well, that's the plain English of half your fashionable matches. I'm odd, you know, and prefer to be an independent spinster and teach music all my days. Ah, but you won't. You were made for a nice, happy home of your own, and I hope you'll get it, Polly dear, said Fanny warmly, feeling so grateful to Polly that she found it hard not to pour out her secrets at once. I hope I may, but I doubt it, answered Polly in a tone that made Fanny wonder if she too knew what heartache meant. Something troubles you, Polly. What is it? Confide in me as I do in you, said Fanny tenderly, for all the coldness she had tried to hide from Polly had melted in the sudden sunshine that had come to her. Do you always? Asked her friend, leaning forward with an irresistible desire to win back the old-time love and confidence too precious to be engaged for a little brief excitement, or the barren honor of bagging a bird, to use Trix's elegant expression. Fanny understood it then, and threw herself into Polly's arms, crying with a shower of grateful tears, "Oh, my dear, did you do it for my sake?" And Polly held her close, saying in that tender voice of hers, I didn't mean to let a lover part this pair of friends if I could help it. That's all of chapter 14. Woo! And tomorrow, good Lord willing, the creeks don't rise, we'll get to chapter 15 called Breakers ahead. Have a wonderful night, and I hope to see you tomorrow, live at 3. Tomorrow's the day you can come up on the panel, as they call it, with me, up on the screen. Come and bring your projects, and you can work on them. Maybe I'll even try to work on something. So excited, I'm finally getting another moss stitch. David Browning's moss stitch, GrannyDee's moss stitch shawl. It's triangular from the bottom up. And after I get that one done, I'll try Fiber Spider's version where he did it top down. Me and my mouse stitch. Be sweet, don't be ugly. I love y'all. See you tomorrow. Sleep good. Bye.